Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph 11a of Maseches Megillah, starting 5 lines from the bottom of the page, where we have the 2 dots, and it says Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. So we just finished off mentioning how Achashverosh ruled over 127 provinces, and how he had complete reign, and it also mentioned Shlomo HaMelech. Also had a great expanse where he ruled. So on that topic, it now elaborates more. It says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. Shlosha malchu b'kippah. There were 3 who ruled b'kippah. Kippah, like a covering. Their kingdom covered the entire, known world. Their empires. Ve'elohein, and these are them. Achav, the king of Yisrael. Ve'achashverosh, the king of Persia. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia. How do we know this? So Achav, how do we know that Achav had a rulership that extended through the entire known world? D'chsiv, because it says, and this is a pasuk that talks about, Achav was on a search for Eliyahu Hanavi. Eliyahu Hanavi was a wanted man, and Ovadia, the prophet, comes to Eliyahu Hanavi and he says, Chai Hashem Elokecha, he swears by Hashem's name, he says, Im yesh gayu mamlacha asher lo shalach Adoni sham levakeshcha. If there's any guy, any nation and kingdom that my master, meaning Achav, that has not sent to search for you, he searched everywhere for you, Vigomer and so on. Now the Vigomer is actually what's most important to us. The end of the pasuk says that Ve'amru ayin, and each of these places that he's not here, each of these kingdoms that he sent to find you, and he made them promise, he made them swear that they couldn't find you. They didn't know where you were. And if not for the fact that he ruled over them, how could he make them promise or swear that they didn't know where you are? It must be that he had some level of power over them, Achav, that he could go to all these kingdoms and force them into swearing that they didn't know the whereabouts of Eliyahu Hanavi. So that indicates that he had a rulership that was over the entire, all the kingdoms. Nebuchadnezzar, how do we know Nebuchadnezzar ruled b'kippah, ruled over the entire known world? D'chsiv, because it says, and this is a pasuk in Yirmiyah, that Hashem says, it will be that any kingdom that doesn't bend its neck to the yoke of the king of Bavel, so then they're going to suffer by sword or by famine or by plague, etc. So this pasuk indicates that every nation would bend its head to the king of Babel, to Nebuchadnezzar. Achashverosh, and what about Achashverosh? How do we know that he ruled every kingdom? Hadamran, it's like we said, that he ruled over 127 provinces, and there was Mehodu V'Yad Kush. It was he ruled the entire kingdom, the entire world like that. Okay. Top of the next page, ask the Gemara, Visuleka, were there no more? Only 3 of the kings ruled the entire world? Only Achav, Achashverosh, and Nebuchadnezzar? V'ha'ika Shlomo. But what about Shlomo, King Solomon? He also ruled, like we said in the last Gemara, that he ruled, we said from Tifsach to Azza, and that just like he ruled those places, he ruled the entire area. So what about Shlomo? So the Gemara says, Ulo Salik Malchusei. He didn't complete his kingship. That's a Gemara in Gittin, that he didn't die a king. He went back to being a commoner at the end of his life. So he's not included in the list. Only people who died a king. Says the Gemara, that makes sense according to the opinion that indeed he didn't finish off his life as king. He went to being a hedyot, he went to being a commoner. But if you hold the other opinion that actually he was started off a king, he became a commoner, he went back to being a king, so then what are you going to say? Why is he not on the list? So the Gemara says, Shlomo milsach riti hava be. Because Shlomo was in a different league, basically. He had another thing going for him. Shamalach al halyonim al tachtonim. That he ruled over the upper realms and the lower realms. Which Rashi says the upper realms means he ruled over Shadim as well, over the demons. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Vayeshev Shlomo akisei Hashem. That Shlomo sat on the throne of Hashem, meaning that Hashem entrusted him with power over not just this world, but also the upper worlds in some way. So, and again, Rashi says that means he was the king over the demons. And if so in a certain sense, his kingship was in a different league, so he's not put on that list. Yes, he ruled over the whole known world, but since he ruled even more than that, so he's not on that list of 3. Ask the Gemara Hava Sancheiriv. But what about Sancheiriv, the king of Ashur? Dichsiv, that he said to Chizkiyahu, the king of Israel, of Yehuda, he said, Mi b'chol Elohei ha'aratzos ha'ela. Who amongst all the gods of all of these lands, Asher hitzilu es arza miyadi, who saved their hands from my hand, and your God's going to save Yerushalayim for me? Nobody's God has stopped me from all the lands, implying he ruled over all the lands. And he said this to Chizkiah. So says the Gemara, yes, but Haika Yerushalayim de lo kavsha. But there's still Jerusalem. He didn't conquer Yerushalayim. He was claiming that he would. He was speaking arrogantly that no one can stop him, not even the God of the Jews. But he never did conquer Yerushalayim. Miraculously, his army was destroyed. Okay, Velika Daryavish. Ask the Gemara, what about Daryavish? Darius. So this, I think, is referring to the first Daryavish, who preceded Achashverosh. So, what about him? Dichsiv, as it says, Daryavish Malka, Daryavish the king, Kasav l'chol amamaya umaya v'lishnai. He sent all nations and people and languages, Didairin b'chol ara, who lived in all the land. Shalom chon yaske, you should increase your peace. So he had somehow, I guess because it says he sent to all the lands, that he had some kind of power over all the lands, it sounds like. So what about him? Why isn't he on the list? So the Gemara says, Halika Sheva de Lamalach Halayu. No, because there were 7 provinces that he didn't rule over. Dichsiv, because the pasuk says, Shafar Shvar Kadam Daryavish V'akima Malchusa Lachashtar Penaya. Like it was good before Daryavish, and he put an emissary, it's not translating, satrap, advisors on every kingdom, Meya ve'esrin, 120. So the implication is he had 120 provinces under his rule, but that means he's missing 7, so he didn't rule over all the land. Velka Koresh, but what about Koresh? Dichsiv, Koresh was also, again, there's some of these names are reused, so sometimes it's hard to tell which Daryavish or which Koresh we're referring to. So this one I think is the one after Daryavish. I think there was a Koresh before Achashverosh. So what about Koresh? Dichsiv, Kol Amar Koresh, Melech Paras. So says Koresh, the king of Persia, Kol Mamlechos Haaretz Nasan li Hashem. Hashem has given me all the lands. So it sounds like he ruled over all the lands. That's what he said. So the Gemara says, Hasam ishtabuch yudika mishtabach benafshe. Now he was just praising himself. He was exaggerating his own power, but he didn't actually rule all the lands, and that's why he's not on the list. So at the end of the day, other than Shlomo, who maybe ruled all the lands, but even more. But otherwise, there are only three that ruled all the lands, literally, and that was Acham, Nebuchadnezzar, and Achashverosh. Okay. Now we return to the Megillah, and we are ready to move on to the second verse of the Megillah, the second pasuk, and now we're going to have some math, some calculating to do over here. So the second pasuk says, "Vayamim ahim keshavas hamelech Achashverosh al kisei malchusa, asher b'Shushan Gabira." In those days, when the king was sitting on his throne in Shushan Gabira, and then the next pasuk says, in the third year of his reign, Bishna Shalosh Melachot. So says the Gemara, "Vayamim ahim keshavas hamelech." In those days, when the king sat on his throne, which sounds like he began to sit on his throne. Keshavas, when he settled into his throne. Uksiv Basrei, but then the next pasuk says, Bishna Shalosh L'Malcho, in the third year of his reign, Asa Mishteh, he made a party for all of his officers and servants. So, what does that mean? Was it Kishavas? Was it at the beginning of his reign? Right? In those days, Kishavas, when he came to sit on the throne, or was it the third year? So, Amar Rava, my Kishavas, Rava says, what does it mean when he settled onto his throne? La'achash nisyashva daito, after his mind was settled. What does that mean? Amar, so just the background is he was worried that the Jews would leave and would be able to go back to Israel and rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. When his mind was settled that wasn't going to happen, so then he made a party. So Amar, he said, Belshazzar chishe v'ta'a. Belshazzar, who was the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, he calculated the end of the prophesied end of the exile of the Jewish people, and but he miscalculated. Anach hashivna v'lo ta'ina. But I, says Achashverosh, I'm going to calculate it, but I'm not going to miscalculate. I'm not going to make a mistake. So Maihi, what are we talking about here? Tichsiv, because the pasuk says, it says in Yirmiyah Hanavi says, Ki lefi melos lebavel shivim shana, because when, according to the fulfillment of Bavel, of 70 years, the 70 years, when 70 years are fulfilled for Bavel, Efkod eschem, I will remember you. So Hashem promises through the prophet that when 70 years are filled, I will remember you. Uksiv, and now it also says, now this pasuk, some take it out, they say it doesn't belong here, but it also implies the 70-year exile. It says, Limalos lecharvos Yerushalayim shivim shana. So in the fulfillment of the destruction of Jerusalem, 70 years. So again, 70 years are mentioned. It's a 70-year exile that the Jewish people, that Yirmiyah prophesies about. And now it's a matter of calculating those 70 years to figure out when the Jews are supposed to go back. And if the 70 years expire and they don't go back, so then that's cause for celebration, they're not going back. That's what Belshazzar and Achashverosh were up to. They wanted to figure out if the 70 years had passed, then it meant that God was forsaking the Jewish people and was cause for celebration. So, how do you get to 70 years? So, Chashuv Arba'in v'chamesh Nebuchadnezzar. So, 45 years of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Ve'esher mutlas to Avel Merudach, and 23 years of Nebuchadnezzar's son, the next king of Babel, whose name was Avel Merudach. V'tarti didei, and then Belshazzar, who was the son of Avel Merudach, he counted 2 more years of his own, Hashivim, that makes 70. So he calculated 45 years of his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar, 23 years of his father Avel Merudach, that puts us at 68, right? 45 and 23 is 68. And then 2 years into his reign, he said, that's 70, and the Jewish people have not been redeemed. They must be, their God has forsaken them, Afik mani de Beis Mikdasha, he took out the vessels of the Beis HaMikdash, Vishtamish B'hu, and he used them, he made a party or something, and he used the vessels of the Beis HaMikdash. This is not Achashverosh we're talking about, this is Belshazzar, the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babel. Okay, now how do we get these numbers? Where do we get 45 from for Nebuchadnezzar? Nebuchadnezzar minalon de'arbain mechamesh din malach. How do we know that Nebuchadnezzar ruled for 45 years? De Amar Mar, because it was said, the master said, Galu b'Sheva, Galu b'Shmona. The Jewish people were exiled in the 7th, they were exiled in the 8th, Galu b'Shmona Esrei, they were exiled in the 18th, Galu b'Tisha Esrei, they were exiled in the 19th. Now what does this mean? Were they exiled 4 times? They were not exiled 4 times. I mean, at least not in that one exile of Babylonia, but they were in a certain sense exiled twice. Meaning, as follows. So we have to get a little bit of background, and I sent out some charts to help us. So, first of all, there were a number of kings of Israel, of Yehuda, towards the end of the first Beis HaMikdash, the first temple. The last 3 kings of Yehuda were Yehoiakim, and then Yehoiachin, his son, and then Tzidkiyahu, who was a son of an earlier king, Yoshiyahu. So, what happened? So, just the background is that Nebuchadnezzar conquered Eretz Yisrael in the 2nd year of his reign, and the 2nd year of him being king, and then he appointed Yehoiakim as a vassal king. He as the governor, as the vassal king, and 3 years later, Yehoiakim rebelled, and the rebellion lasted for 3 years. And so it was 1 year that he was a vassal king, then a rebellion. 3 years later, well, I guess it depends how you calculate it, but right. So through, let's say 3 years later, in year 4, he begins his rebellion. It lasts for 3 years until the 7th year. Since Nebuchadnezzar conquered, actually I should back up a step. It starts with Nebuchadnezzar becoming king, and this is how they present it on the chart. Nebuchadnezzar becomes king in, we'll call it year 0 of his reign, and then 1 year into his reign he conquers Eretz Yisrael. He appoints Yehoiakim as the vassal king. 3 years later, Yehoiakim rebels. So now it's year 4 of Nebuchadnezzar's reign that Yehoiakim rebels. The rebellion lasts for 3 years, which puts us to year 7 of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. And then he kills Yehoiakim. Yehoiakim is killed, and instead Nebuchadnezzar appoints Yehoiachin, his son, Yehoiakim's son Yehoiachin, to take his place. In the chart they say Yehoiachin rebels against Nebuchadnezzar. I think Rashi here just says that Nebuchadnezzar was advised that it's not smart to appoint his son, he's just going to do the same thing. And so shortly after he appoints Yehoiachin, he says, never mind that. And basically just 3 months later, I think, Yehoiachin is sent into exile. So he's not killed, he's sent into exile, he's brought to Babylonia, basically. And along with him, groups of people. So that's the first exile, is the exile of Yehoiachin, which is still, I think, 11 years before the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash. After he sends Yehoiachin into exile, he appoints a new vassal king, which is Tzidkiyahu HaMelech. Tzidkiyahu will remain king of Israel, of Yehuda and Israel, until the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash 11 years later. So if we go back to the years of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, so 7 years into his reign is when Yehoiachin rebelled. He appointed Yehoiakim rebelled. He appointed Yehoiachin in his stead. We'll call that year 8. But then, like I said, it was only 3 months. Then he appointed Tzidkiyahu. And then 11 years later is when he destroyed the Beis HaMikdash and sent Tzidkiyahu into exile, which would be our second exile. And that would be in year 19 of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. So now let's read in the Gemara. So we had a number of numbers here. We said they were exiled in year 7, in year 8, in year 18, and year 19. So what does that mean? So it explains the Gemara. Galu b'sheva l'kivush Yehoiakim. They were exiled 7 years after Yehoiakim was conquered. Not 7 years into the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, but 7 years after Nebuchadnezzar conquered Eretz Yisrael, which is in the second year of his reign. So that was the Galus Yehoiachin. That was the first Galus, the first exile, the exile of Yehoiachin. Sheishmona Nebuchadnezzar, which was in the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign altogether. The 7th year since he conquered Eretz Yisrael, 8 years of his reign. So that's the 7 and the 8. Galu b'shmona esrei l'kivush. Now we said they were exiled again in the 18th and 19th year. So again, the 18th is 18 years l'kivush Yehoiakim. 18 years after Nebuchadnezzar conquered Yehoiakim, after he conquered Eretz Yisrael. And Galus Tzidkiyahu, this was the second Galus, the second exile of Tzidkiyahu. Sheitcha esrei Nebuchadnezzar, which is 19 years since Nebuchadnezzar came to rule in the first place. De Amarmar, because the master said, Shana Rishona Kivesh Nineveh. In his first year as king, he conquered Nineveh from the Assyrians. Shniya Kivesh Yehoiakim. And in his second year, he conquered Israel from Yehoiakim. Uksiv. Fine, so that's the starting point. Like it was in his second year of his reign that he conquered Yehoiakim, which means it was in the 19th year of his reign that he destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. Uksiv, and it says, Vayhi b'shloshim v'sheva shana legalos Yehoiachin. It was 37 years after Yehoiachin was exiled. Yehoiachin Melech Yehuda. B'shnei Basar Chodesh, b'shrim Mechamisha Chodesh was the 12th month, the 25th of the month. Nasa Avil Merudach Melech Bavel. B'shnas Malchusa. In the year of his kingship, meaning the year that Avil Merudach, the son of Nebuchadnezzar, became king, he raised up Yehoiachin, who had been exiled, as Rosh Yehoiachin, Melech Yehuda, the head of Yehoiachin, the king of Judah. He removed him, he freed him from prison. So this is 37 years after Yehoiachin has been imprisoned. Avil Merudach comes to power and frees him. Now, how many years into Nebuchadnezzar's reign was Yehoiachin exiled? We said 8 years. 7 years after he conquered Israel, 8 years after he became king. So 8 years after Nebuchadnezzar becomes king, he exiles Yehoiachin. 37 years later, his son, Avil Merudach, takes over and frees Yehoiachin from prison. So that's a total. So Tmani, 8, Utlasing Vesheva, and 37. Harei Arba'in V'chamesh, that equals 45. So that's how we know that Nebuchadnezzar reigned for 45 years. The Esther Utlast Avil Merudach. And then we have 22 years of Avil Merudach. How do we know that? Gemara. That's just a tradition that Avil Merudach would reign for 22 years. So that's 23 years. That's 45 and 23. That gets us to 68. V'tarti D-Day. And the 2 years of Belshazzar, the next king of Bavel, Hashivin, that equals 70. So he says 70 years have passed of Bavel, of the Babylonian Empire, from the time that they first took over, conquered Nineveh, the rise of to power of Nebuchadnezzar, the rise of the empire of Bavel. It's 70 years. So Amar, he said, Hashta Vade Sulam Ifriki. If 70 years of Bavel have passed, that's it. Why is he counting 70 years of Bavel? Because that's what the first pasuk said. It said, Lifi Milos Libavel Shivim Shana, when there's a fulfillment of Bavel of 70 years. So he thought that meant 70 years from when Bavel came to power, from Babylonia became an empire. So he said, 70 years have passed. Hashtavade sulo mifriki. So the Jews are not going to be redeemed. They're not going to be remembered. Afik mani debei mikdasha. So Belshazzar took out the vessels of the Beis HaMikdash, which they had in storage from when they destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. V'ishtamish bu, and he started to use them. Hainu dekamar le Daniel. And that's what was meant when Daniel said to him, Daniel says, I believe this is after there's the handwriting on the wall that on the night of Belshazzar's death. He said, "V'almari shmayes romamta, you raised yourself over the master of the universe. Ulemane divese hesev kadamach, and the vessels of his house you brought before you." Uksiv, and it says, "Belelia katal Belshazzar malka kastai." That night, Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, of the Babylonians, was killed. So that was it. He made a mistake. He miscalculated. He started using the vessel of the Beis HaMikdash. He was punished. Okay, so now, that was Belshazzar's miscalculation. Now, what about Achashverosh? So, Uksiv, V'Daryavish Mada Kiva Malchusa, Kibarshnim Shisim V'Tartan. Now, Daryavish, the first Daryavish, the Median, took over the kingship. The Medians are the ones who raided the Chaldeans, raided the Babylonians, and killed Belshazzar, and took over. So Daryavish was 62 at the time. Fine, so he was the next one. Now we go back to Achashverosh. Amar, so Achashverosh said, Iyu mitatai. He miscalculated. Ana chashivna v'lo ta'ina. I'm going to calculate, but I'm not going to make a mistake in my calculation. Mi kesiv l'malchus Bavel. Does it say that it's 70 years from the kingdom of Babel, from the rise to power of the kingdom of Babel? L'Bavel kesiv. It says 70 years from Babel, of Babel. My Bavel. What does it mean, 70 years of Babel? L'Galus Babel. 70 years from the Galus of Babel, the exile of Babylonia. Which happened when? It happened in the 8th year of, well, which Galus? But Achashverosh thought it was talking about the first Galus. The first Galus, the beginning of the exile was in the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. That's when he sent Yehoiachin into Galus, into Babylonia, and imprisoned him, along with other people that also went into Galus then. So, Kama B'tziran, how many years are missing still from when Belshazzar thought it was over? Tmani. There's 8 more years after Belshazzar that are needed to get to 70 years from the beginning of the exile. Choshev, he calculated and he replaced those 8 years in his calculations. Chada de Belshazzar. Now there's 1 more year to count to Belshazzar, because it was after 2 years in his 3rd year that Belshazzar thought that he was there already. So that's 1 year of Belshazzar. V'chamesh to Daryavish v'Koresh. Now between Belshazzar and Achashverosh there were 2 kings. There was Daryavish and Koresh, and it was a total of 5 years. So that's 1 and 5, that's 6. V'tarti didei. And then after 2 years of Achashverosh had passed, that makes 8. Hashivin. So now you're back to 70 from the time of the exile of Yehoiachin. So Kevan de Chazi de Malu Shivin V'Oifrik, when he saw that 70 years had elapsed from that time and the Jews were not redeemed, Amar, he said, Hashtavade Sugo Mifriki, he said, now they're certainly not going to be redeemed. If it didn't happen like the prophecy of Yirmiyah, it's not going to happen. Their God has forsaken them. Afik mani devei mikdasha v'ishtabish behu. So Achashverosh took out the vessels of the Beis HaMikdash and he used them at the party that he made at the beginning of Megillah Esther. And that's Kishavas Amalch Achashverosh, when he was calmed down, he was settled, he felt settled, the Jews are not being saved, so that's when he made a party. And he took out those vessels from the Beis HaMikdash and used them at the party. Ba Satan v'rikid b'neim, but the Satan came, the Satan came and danced amongst them, v'haragas Vashti, and caused Vashti to get killed. Okay, so what went wrong though? V'hashapir chashiv. It seems like Achashverosh calculated correctly. Where did he go wrong? Says the Gemara, Iyunami mitatai. No, he also made a mistake. He should have counted from the destruction of Yerushalayim the 70 years. He counted from the first exile of Yehoiachin, but it was 11 years later that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed and they were sent into Galus. And that's the other pasuk that we mentioned that the Gemara doesn't necessarily need to say earlier, but that's the pasuk in Daniel, which says, where Daniel says that the word of Hashem came to Yirmiyah Hanavi, Lemalos lecharvos Yerushalayim 70 shana, to fill from the destruction of Yerushalayim 70 years. Well, that was 11 years later. After Yehoiachin was exiled, it was 11 more years before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed and Tzidkiyahu was sent into Galus. So, sent into exile. So that's what the Gemara says. He should have counted from then. He was 11 years off. Okay, so really the prophecy was for 11 years after Achashverosh's party. Asked the Gemara sof, but still in the end, Kama Bitzir, how many years is he missing? Chadesar. He's missing 11 years. Iyu Kama Malch, but how many years did Achashverosh reign for? Arbesar. He reigned for 14 years. So Arbesar Didei, Bailei, the Beis HaMikdash. So the Beis HaMikdash should have been built in the 14th year of Achashverosh's reign, in the last year of his reign. Al-Lemar Ksiv, why does it say, this is a pasuk in Ezra, it says, Beidin betelas avidas beis Eloka dibir shalayim, that they had nullified the building of the Beis Hamikdash, and until the second year of Daryavesh, who was the son of Achashverosh and Esther. So it was only in the second year of Daryavesh that the Beis Hamikdash was rebuilt. But according to our calculation, it should have been in the 14th year of Achashverosh, not the second year of the next king. So Amar Rava, Shana Mikutos Havu. Rava says no, because some of the years were short. In other words, there was overlap between the different kings. We gave, this king, Nebuchadnezzar, was 45 years, and Evel Merodach was 23, and Belshazzar was 3, but those aren't full years, and there's overlap. And you end up there all together, it's not 70 years that have elapsed. Even if you do, it's not 45 and 23, it's like 44 and a half plus 22 and a half, and then Belshazzar is only 2.5, and you add them together, you don't get to 70 so fast. So that's another place where they miscalculated, was counting the years as if they were full years, when really they were sometimes partial years that have to be added together. And Tanya Nami Hachi, the top of the next page, the Brisa also says this, Ve'od shana acheres leBavel, that Ve'amar Daryavish Vishlima, there was still one more year of the Babylonian exile, and Daryavish, it was fulfilled in Daryavish's time, and that's when they completed or really returned to rebuilding the Beis Hamikdash, 70 years exactly after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash itself and the exile of Tzidkiyahu. Now we should mention that they had restarted building it earlier, and Achashverosh, as we saw in last week's Gemara, put a stop to it. And that was 70 years after Yehoiachin's exile, and that was the fulfillment. This is what some of the Mefarshim say. That was the fulfillment of the first pasuk, which said that there would be L'fimelos leBavel shivim shana efkod eschem, that after the fulfillment of 70 years of Bavel, I will remember you. So that was 70 years. That was 70 years after the Babylonian exile began, when Yehoiachin was sent into Babel. Efkod eschem, I'll remember you. There was a pekida of sorts. There was some level of remembrance that they started rebuilding Beis Hamikdash, but that was stopped. But the actual fulfillment of the other prophecy was, or the final fulfillment of it, 70 years from Lemalos Charvos Yerushalayim, which was the other part of the prophecy from the destruction of Yerushalayim. It was 7 years until they restarted building the Beis Hamikdash in a way that would actually be lasting and will end up being completed as the second Beis Hamikdash. Okay, we'll continue here next time.